if you're going through something hard, you're going through something hard, even if it seems small compared to some other people's stuff. And like Neil said, reach out, talk to people. It's okay. Don't feel embarrassed for feeling, like you're finding something hard or you're anxious about something. Talk about it. It's all right.
Today on the Red Print podcast, we talk about anxiety, what it is, and how to overcome it.
We'll be giving practical advice for reframing anxious thoughts,
as well as quick wins and tips for what to do if your thoughts start spiraling.
Welcome to the Red Print, your wellness podcast. What are your thoughts and feelings on it, guys?
I have a long history with anxiety. I've been on a journey with it. I used to have a massive problem with it. I used to not sleep. I used to have panic attacks and things. I had a real problem growing up with being super, super anxious, super socially anxious. And I think we're going to later on talk about kind of overcoming that. So I'll talk about that more then. But for me, anxiety as well is a very physiological thing. I can feel it in my chest. I feel it in my body. And it can feel as well just like spiraling and just being completely overwhelmed with everything. And it's not even always based in reality or logic for me.
Yeah.
It's making me feel terrified speaking about it. But yeah, anxiety for me has always been just this completely overpowering, all-encompassing thing. And it can you'll have the low-grade anxiety that's all the time, but then you can also get where it just really flares up and just becomes this massive thing. So I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone else's thoughts on this and how other people have overcome this. What about you, Neil?
Yeah, I'm definitely someone that is prone to anxious thinking, and I'm, despite my job being very much a social job, I am absolutely, I would class myself as an introvert, or at least a person with introverted characteristics. So for me, I spend a lot of time in my head. That's I'm very in touch with my inner world, if you like. That's where I spend most of my time. And as a result of that, I am very, very prone to overthinking things and then thinking about what's going to be coming up in the future. And for me, that's certainly what anxiety is kind of all about. It's a fear of what might be coming in the future, and that ambiguous future and the unknown future. Cue Rachel Williams singing Into the Unknown.
Into the Unknown.
Thank you. But yeah, the unknownness and making up stories about what might happen in the future if you don't do X, Y, or Z thing. So yeah, I definitely, and it's something that I really recognize in conversations. And I have conversations always throughout the week with students who are dealing with similar kinds of things. And I think the good news about it is, if you are aware of it, and if you become aware of your thought patterns, you might never completely get rid of it. I don't think the goal should be zero anxiety, but you can manage it, and you can start to kind of treat it with an amount of curiosity. And again, we'll get into that. But as I say, that for me is definitely that feeling. It's the feeling of being inside my head, thinking about what might happen in the future. Very much like Rachel said, it's very much based on emotion rather than logic and rational thought. And something that's just so unbelievably common that you don't speak to people who don't understand what these things are. How about you, Daanish?
In terms of anxious thoughts, I agree 100%. It's, for me, I am aligned with it's in my head. I constantly replay similar thoughts. I know this is happening. I know I shouldn't be doing it, but the thing is, you do it anyway. You just keep on replaying it. And then it links to Rachel's point as well. It gets too much. For me, what happens when there's I go through cycles. I could be feeling 100% confident as anything, literally loud, everything. And then I go through stages where I'm just quiet, because I'm in my head, as you said. The thing is, with it, as long as you keep on replaying it in your head, it'll keep on happening. It's not something you can get rid of, I think, as well. It's gonna constantly go away, come back, go away, come back. And it is something manageable. You can't get rid of it 100%. It will come and go. And I think, as you said, it's self-talk. I think at the end of the day, it's like you talking to yourself, because at the end of the day, you can, in a sense, control your thoughts because it's you. At the end of the day, it's not someone else. You're not thinking about something else. You're thinking about yourself, and you're just replaying scenarios in your head about yourself and where it potentially may lead to. The trigger of it potentially may be is, let's say I have certain tasks to do, and let's say I have a deadline for university, then I keep on dragging it. And then my thoughts keep on saying, you're supposed to be doing it, and you keep on ignoring that thought. And then it gets closer and closer. And then you're like, oh crap. But I think for me, that's what triggers it. Because when I'm not keeping myself accountable, I know, of course, it even happens when I keep myself accountable, because you think you're not doing enough.
I don't know if you can see my face, but whenever, because if you're listening to this, you can't see my face, but whenever you mention that, my face, I'm just like, because I just have that feeling of, so it's called rumination, when you think about the past and you go back on it over and over again. I've been in that position before, and you just over it again and again and again. And you can get the spotlight effect as well, which is when you're just looking at yourself and what I did over and over again. And then you're thinking, oh, everyone else noticed that. Everyone else thinks you're an awful person now. Everyone else, they notice what you did, and you're like, oh my god, I said that thing and it's so awful. And you just get obsessed with it. So whenever you say that, it just really reminds me of that.
That's it.
What's interesting with those is that I think anything that we're talking about here always has like a base in logic. It doesn't start with an illogical thought, but it's what it then goes on and becomes. So it starts off as this particular thing, that particular initiating event, and then we attach lots of other things to that, and then it becomes, we're actually not worried about the initiating event anymore. It's then become this kind of bulbous thing. There was a quote that I was looking at earlier about it's Ellis, who we were talking about last time with the rational emotive behavior therapy, and saying it's we're not upset by things, but we're upset about what we think of those things. So it's not the event itself, it's how we are interpreting the event and what we then add to that. We say, right, well, I haven't done this thing, therefore that makes me X, Y, Z. But it's not the thing. The thing itself is actually neutral, but it's our thought patterns that are then becoming against us, work, or potentially working against us, and getting in the way.
Here's an example of what happened. I think it does lead to anxiety somewhat. So let's say a year ago. So in my head, I was like, I'm going to go to the gym. Okay, this is just a simple example. So let's say you want to go to the gym, okay? And then the next day you don't go to the gym. And then you keep on saying you want to go to a gym, but you don't, okay? So it all goes on for a week, and then it goes on for a month. This is what happened to me, okay? I kept on having this thought in my head, you're going to a gym, but I didn't go. So this lasted for months, okay? And then throughout these months, I was beating myself up mentally. I was like, come on, you can go to a gym. You can. But in my head, I was like, no, I'll just go tomorrow. And then this went on for an entire year, okay? An entire year of saying, I'll go to a gym. So what this done to me, I believe, was it was just trapping myself mentally, because I wasn't exactly following through on what I was going to say I was going to do. And I think for me, that's what triggers it. Because if I'm not going to do what I say I'm going to do, I'm going to feel like crap. Okay, so what happened after this year of saying I'm going, not going, saying I'm going, not going, I was beating myself up. So a year later, I discovered a mental toughness program, and within that element of it was work out twice a day. It's not, of course, weight loss, fat loss. It's just mental toughness to like get rid of that I'll do it tomorrow mentality. So through that, I then was like, okay, I can do it. And then those thoughts, I wouldn't say disappeared, I kind of got a hold of them, if that makes sense. I wasn't letting it run rampage in my head. I wasn't in a spiral. It still spirals. I'm not going to lie to you. It still spirals. That's normal. That's normal human behavior. But I was able to understand, okay, work out, do it, you'll be fine. You'll be able to like combat it to a certain degree. You can fight against it because it's just a war in your own head, isn't it? At the end of the day, like you can do what you need to do, but it'll come. It can go. You just need to keep on going, keep on going. And I think what I learned through that year of not following through on exactly what I was going to do was that it can get bigger and bigger. But as long as you, of course, I would say keep yourself accountable. It can help a little bit, at least, in terms of controlling it, in terms of saying, no, shut up, this is my own head. There's no shame in saying, yes, I have anxiety every now and then. That's perfectly normal. That's not something to shy away from because it's normal human behavior. I think humans, me in particular, always thought it was just me who had these thoughts. I'm sure people may resonate with that. It's like you may feel like it's just you because you're constantly trapped in your head, like, this is really bad. However, as you mentioned, people do reach out because they understand that they do have people to speak to at the end of the day.
I think that's a great point. It actually links a bit to what Neil said earlier about story and narrative.
Yeah.
So my anxiety and the way things have worked for me has been slightly different to yours, whereas because putting things off, that didn't bother me too much. That was not my situation. My situation has always been around like getting found out, being an imposter, that side of stuff, imposter syndrome stuff.
That's what you mean.
Which I think is common as well. I think a lot of students feel this, especially sometimes students who've got in through clearing feel like, you know, I'm a bad person. People are going to find out that I'm not actually supposed to be here, or people who are from like working class backgrounds or all sorts of sort of underrepresented backgrounds sometimes feel like I'm not supposed to be here. Like people are going to find that out. And I used to feel that a lot and feel like people are going to find out that I'm a bad person. So that was always with my rumination. It's like, it slipped and people are going to realize.
It's like a disconnect, isn't there?
Yeah, and then it becomes like this self-fulfilling prophecy because I'm like, if I'm constantly thinking that people are going to find out that I'm a bad person, that means that I'm a bad person. So I sort of put too much emphasis on those thoughts and saw them as kind of truth and had this like baseline truth. And what I ended up having to learn was, this stuff is going on in my head all the time, but it doesn't mean anything. Your brain has just got some chatter sometimes, and it's just saying weird things. You don't have to play into it. You can just let it go. And now I think that I'm actually a less anxious person than the average person. I feel like I am all right now. It was just constant, just exhaustion because I was constantly anxious about everything. Like I used to take every single book I had to school every day because I was so scared something would happen and I'd forget it. And my bag was enormous. And like I said, I wasn't sleeping. And I just was I was so high strung. It was bonkers. And I think if you know me now, that's not kind of the way that I am now. And I really did. Yeah, I really changed a lot. And some of it was intentional, some of it wasn't, but the main thing that changed was being able to just ignore that and just let go of it, not worry. Oh, who cares if I'm a bad person as well? Like I can't control that. I am who I am. It's all right. I don't need to assess that. And now I just relax quite a bit. So I think thinking about self-talk and like Neil said, narrative, the story we tell ourselves. And sometimes we choose to tell ourselves stories that punish us. Don't worry about that. Don't go into that. It doesn't matter. You know, choose to tell yourself a nicer story and a story that helps you. So I think that's a great point you made earlier, Neil.
Really important.
100. And with the stories and with the narratives, it's normally, if we were going to write that down, normally what we're writing is a tragedy. We're writing about something, you know, where something awful happens and this is the descent of me, you know, because that's normally, again, I assume this is what other people think with that, but it's like, you know, this one thing's going to happen and then that's going to be the start of this big descent. And, you know, if I don't go to the gym, this is going to happen and that's going to be the beginning of it. Or if I don't bring my books to school, that's going to be the beginning of it. And then it's all going to slide away. And it's a tragedy, right? You know, that's the same as like any story of a tragedy. That's what happens. What you're watching is one initiating event happening and then everything going wrong. And I can't remember where I'd heard about this from, but it's saying, okay, well, That's one version of it. That's one version of the thing. Maybe something bad has happened, or maybe something is about to happen, or you think something's about to happen. Why don't you reframe it as something else? Why don't you rewrite that story as a comedy? Or why don't you rewrite that story as a quest? You know, and the quest one's really useful because it's saying, okay, well, maybe something that you don't like has happened, but why don't you rewrite that story and think, instead of the tragedy where the end is the sad bit, instead saying, okay, well, maybe there's going to be some challenging things that we're going to go through, but ultimately think about the end point. You know, think about the end of the quest storyline where everyone's so happy about it, and actually they've become even better or more well as a result of that. And rewriting those and just playing with that in your mind kind of takes some of the sting out of it. It takes some of the sting of the tragedy being the true story, because that's normally what we think is like, well, our mind must be telling us the right thing because it's created this story. It's like, okay, well, let's create some alternatives. And that does two things, which A, makes the tragedy story not the objectively right one, because it's not the only one that exists anymore, but it also just gives you a different mental image to work toward.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, our brains are so fickle in that sense. And I really like that, because like, it doesn't take a lot to just slightly move your thinking away, and then it will become something else. Then you're like, oh, cool, okay, right, well, I can do this, or I'm now interested in it, or I'm now interested in developing it from another way, as opposed to it being this really big, scary thing.
You reminded me of another piece of advice, which is, it's usually not a tiger, which is a weird piece of advice. But what it is that our brains, sometimes the way they've developed, the way they keep us safe, is that we hear a rustle and we think that's a tiger. Because, and it was helpful. It used to be that it's helpful to think that rustle is a tiger, because it's better to think that rustle is a tiger, run away, than stay there and think, you know what, it's usually not a tiger. And then the one time it's a tiger, you're eaten. So it's usually not a tiger, but still our brains are like that. Like something will go wrong and we'll do what Neil said and we'll think, this is my demise. This is right. So literally, being totally honest, I found out that I had made a mistake today. And I found out I'd made a mistake at work. It's a boring Blackboard thing. So I'd made a mistake and I was like, my career's over. I'm going to get fired. It's awful. Turned out I just contacted IT. It wasn't a big deal at all. And they were like, yeah, no, I've just corrected that. It's fine. But our brains still do that. They still kind of latch on to the worst possible narrative. And that might be the first thing they go for. But sometimes I'll remind myself that I'm like, it's probably not a tiger. So even though my brain and my instinct is to be like, it's the end of the world, it's probably not. And I think Neil's advice about thinking about the different possible narratives can be helpful with that.
Yeah.
So thanks for that, Neil.
It's like both of those are brilliant points, because it's all about, I suppose, checking yourself when you feel those like high frequency, I wouldn't say danger signals, but high frequency signals in your head, like what's going on. Check yourself at that moment in time, and then you, as Neil said, reframe it, because it's very, your brain, now I picked up something that I don't know where I remember it from. Okay, your brain doesn't know what's real and what's false. Okay, so let's say you can reframe it. It's not metaphorical. You can reframe it. Okay, so let's say you have one mental image of yourself potentially not doing the best you can. Why don't you just imagine yourself doing the greatest you possibly can? Like, why not? Because at the end of the day, you can imagine exactly what you want to. Like, there's no one saying you have to imagine these thoughts. Like, who told you this? No one. It's just all in your head. It's in my head. It's in everyone's head. It's not something you should stick to, as in like, oh, okay, I have to think in this way, this very linear thought process. You can imagine the greatest version of yourself and just roll with it. Just roll with it. That's all you have to do. And let's just do it for a week, okay? Just do it for a week and imagine how you'd feel, okay? Because if you're imagining you're the greatest you can be, okay, how would you interact with people? How would you complete your work? How would you present yourself to other people? How would you talk to your family at the end of the day? You can shower them with love instead of, in my past experiences, I felt very enclosed because I was trapped in my own head. My family knew this at the time, but they let me deal with it, because at the end of the day, you can voice your opinions out. You can seek advice. You can seek opinions. You have to use those opinions. Okay, so imagine the greatest version of yourself, and then put that into action. You'll feel amazing. I don't. It's a win-win situation, no?
I like your point about talking to people as well, because that's something that I've found helpful. I think we haven't mentioned it much yet, which is just the benefit of talking to people. Like my mum was my absolute hero growing up. Like I would just keep everything to myself for so long, and then it would like explode. I'd have these like I'd just be like crying and snotty
Like,
and
yeah,
disgusting. Yeah, it would just be for ages like this pressure cooker, and then it would just explode out of nowhere, and she'd be like, "Whoa, what's happened?"
yeah.
But she was always amazing. Like, you know, and talking to her, she would always say, like, a problem shared is a problem halved. And before I told her anything, I'd always be like, yeah, right, whatever. You're totally wrong. You don't understand. But then I'd tell her and I would feel a million times better. And that can just be like a sense check sometimes,
Because you're getting
especially if you're
another
trying to change the narrative.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can just sort of check because you're like, so if I had said to Neil today, Neil, I've made this mistake on Blackboard, you know, and he'd be like, oh, that's not a big deal. Like, I've probably done that before as well. Just email IT. Like, it's fine.
But even before that, probably what would happen is you would say that thing out loud and
Yeah.
you'd say, I've made this mistake on Blackboard. You wouldn't even need me to say, oh, don't
Yeah.
worry about it. You would hear
Yeah.
that out loud and be like, oh, actually, I shouldn't, there's no need to worry about this. When they exist in our head, they become knotty and they grow and they grow and they grow and they grow.
Right.
And then when someone says, you know, okay, so what is the thing? And normally we don't start with that. What's worrying you? Oh, it's this and this and this and all these things and all these calamities that could have happened. And then the useful thing about having that is that we then talk that through. We then have those discussions, and then eventually you get to the actual the root of it. And once you say the root of that out loud, and then take a really rational approach to it, and the rational approach to that is to say, okay, well, let's play the worst case scenario game. Okay, so what are you worried about? I'm worried about this particular thing. Cool. So what would happen if that did happen? Oh, this would happen. It would be awful because, okay, but would it be awful? And, you know, you kind of really interrogate each of those potential outcomes that you're thinking about. And what you find out is that when you say it out loud, it's nowhere near as scary as when it was in your head.
Has anyone ever had any experiences with journaling or writing it down? Because if you haven't got anyone to talk to, that's something you can do as well, is just write it out. I've never got on with it, but I wonder if it's helped anyone else.
So I'd say 100% in terms of there might not be a mentor perhaps you surround yourself with, or you might be wondering how exactly am I supposed to portray my thoughts outwards. Journaling is a great way. I do it myself when I go sleep or when I wake up. I'm going to tell you now, I don't do it always. Okay. There are days where I forget. Okay. So just write down what's on your mind, and potentially you might get like a eureka moment. As weird as it sounds, you do get those, okay, where it just clicks and you're like, oh, I should be doing this instead of this. So I just write that down to remind myself every now and then. And was it someone, David Goggins, I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he says there's a cookie jar, okay, a cookie jar in your head about all the things you've done that is amazing. Okay, so journaling can help do this instead of just mental aspects of it. You can see the amazing things you've done. So it just reminds you of how great you are. Like, you might not understand exactly what they're teaching you, but as long as you keep that thought in your head, you're not going to be dragging yourself down. And as Neil said, you can untangle these thoughts. It's not all these different ones. There's one singular thought that potentially spiraled out of control. So as long as you keep yourself in check, journal it, check in with yourself, I believe reflection is key.
I would also be interested in hearing about so we've spoken about lots of bits, spoken about reframing narratives and these kind of like general thought processes. Yes. What do you do? Quick fire tips here on when you're in that moment, when you're in the moment where things are spiraling, you know you're feeling anxious about something, so you're conscious of being anxious about it. What can people do? Practical tips.
Have you heard of, I think I can't remember what kind of, it's called like square breathing sometimes. And I do a lot of, I'll do the breathing stuff because, like I said, for me, it's a very physiological thing, and you can kind of reset your like flight or fight a bit apparently through doing this. But what you do is you breathe in for 4, So you can draw a square while you're doing it. So you can,
I've heard. Yeah, carry on.
you like breathe in for 4, hold it for 4, breathe out for 4, hold it for 4, breathe in for 4, hold, and then you do. So you're breathing in, holding it, breathing out, holding it in 4s, and you can draw the square if you want while you're doing it. But I do find that helpful. That is something that I will do sometimes.
Changing your physical state straight away. So let's say you're in bed. No, you may not be in bed. You're just somewhere in the house. You're thinking about some scenario constantly in your head. Just drop down, change your steps, do some jumping jack, do some press ups, do something to get you out of your head. Do something that will, I suppose, keep you focused on pushing yourself, because that's why I like exercise so much, because without that, I think I'd be trapped in my head 24/7. Because as you push yourself, you're not focusing on your day, you're focusing on the weights in front of you. You're focusing on trying to push your body just a little bit more. And as you feel, as after, it can be a walk or run or anything. It could be anything that moves your body at the end of the day. You just feel refreshed after. That's one of my tips.
Yeah, and another one for a non-physical task, if folks maybe doing physical things is less their thing. Another really simple one is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is look around your room and look for 5 particular things. So it could be like, okay, 5 white things, right? There's paper there, there's a book there, there's a thing here, right? So you find 5 things, and then you find 4 things of something else, and then 3 things of something else, 2 things of something else, 1 thing of something else. And if you, again, it just breaks whatever thought pattern has started to build on itself. It breaks that. And by the time you come back to it, you're not in the same place anymore, just as something similar. And again, yeah, you could get up, you could do that in a different place. You could just go and walk around the room or wherever it is you want to do. But that's, again, something that is quite active, because I find it difficult. Yeah. It's things like I've never really cracked, for me, being able to meditate, for example. Like, I find that actually really difficult, and I think something that my brain seems to work well with is having like a little task or a little something to attach onto. And these 5, 4, 3, 2, 1s are a really good way of it not being a productive task. It's not me doing something or doing something that has any real tangible merit, but it's my brain still just being hooked onto something. I was saying last week about driving, I find the same. Playing Mario Kart is perfect for it. Mario Kart is amazing for that, because my brain is focused on something that I know I'm really familiar with. So I'm having to focus on it, but it breaks up those overall patterns that I might otherwise be thinking about. Yeah, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I think the last point as well for us to kind of circle back to is the importance of reaching out. So, we've spoken about lots of these things, and we've spoken about awareness. We've spoken about how to be aware of your particular thoughts and your particular feelings, and how those are a very normal part of what people would experience throughout their day-to-day life. So kind of paying attention to those. We've spoken about tips of how to frame that more generally, and kind of your overall philosophy of how you treat your brain. We've spoken about quick tips, and I think the last one is maybe to just circle back to this point of reaching out to people to speak to, and reaching out to people at the university to speak to, whether that's your tutors, whether that's your program team, whether that's the well-being team, whether that's the student advisors. Everyone wants to hear from you. It's very, very easy, I think, if you've got anxious thoughts, it's very easy to belittle them, and it's very easy to say, oh, I'm sure, other people go through much worse than this. Other people can cope with this much better. I don't want to be a burden to someone. I don't want to bore someone with my thoughts, with my things. And nothing could be further from the truth with people when they come. I'm nothing but grateful when people reach out and want to talk about how they're feeling about things. And that comes across in all areas. People want to hear, and people want to be able to help. So reaching out is such an important task.
Want to help you. That's it.
Definitely.
That's the key. It's not.
And I think, sorry,
Carry
yeah,
on.
and I think that point is especially important now because everyone's had a hard year, and I think it can be tempting for people to not give themselves credit for how hard this year has been. So they'll be like, oh, maybe I haven't got COVID. Maybe I haven't had a family member die. Whereas some people have had some really, really tough stuff. But no matter what your situation is, this year has been tough for everyone. Like, I keep saying, you know, if any one person just on their own had this year and it said, you know what, for most of the year, you can't see whoever you want. You can't go to whatever shops you want to go to. You can't, if any one person had that for the year, you'd be like, wow, that's a hard year in normal times. Whereas now, it's like the bar for having a bad year has been increased so high that everyone feels like their problems are insignificant. But it just doesn't matter. It's relative. If you're going through something hard, you're going through something hard, even if it seems small compared to some other people's stuff. And like Neil said, reach out, talk to people. It's okay. Don't feel embarrassed for feeling, you know, like you're finding something hard or you're anxious about something. Talk about it. It's all right.
That's important because at the end of the day, we want to help you. We don't want to belittle any problems anyone's going through. At the end of the day, you're a human being. We're all humans. We know everyone goes through tough times. It's not something you should ignore, as we all said, because it's part of human nature for us to go through these things. And at the end of the day, we want to help you. We don't want to not know what you're going through, because if no one knows what you're going through, how can we help each other at the end of the day? I think, yeah, important points, every single one of you.
And on that note, on that beautiful note, shall we say goodbye to each other for one more week?
I love you. Yeah.
Really,
Aww.
really grateful for this, guys. This was a really fantastic chat. And for anyone that's listening, we see you, we hear you. You're all right. You're good. You're a good person. We're glad you're here. And yeah, have an amazing week, guys. And we'll look forward to seeing you in 1 week's time.
1 week. We love you guys.
See ya. Bye.